right? Here what happens? So whenever before receiving of action potential, what is the condition of this A site? Inside negative, outside positive, as like this as like this. But why it is reversibility is takes place, voltage is reversed? What is the reason? Because of action potential, receiving of action potential nerve impulse. So charges are reversed. Inside there is positive and outside there is a negative charge. So polarized become as depolarized, right? And again, whenever from here the action potential passes from this region to this region, then what happens? Here becomes polarized and here becomes depolarized. As like that, throughout the axon, the action potential transmits, and finally it reaches to the axon terminal, right? And what is the region for changing of voltages here? So here given, see, always the charge will move from this region to this region, and here to here, and positive to negative, and here positive to negative also, and here positive to negative. So whenever positive to negative is takes place, then obviously the voltages are changed, the charges are reversed. Clear? So here explained. See, propagation of action potential at site A, at sites head, site B, outer surface is positive and inner surface is negative. Site B, what happens? Outer surface is positive and inner surface is negative. So outer positive, inner negative means polarized or depolarized. This is polarized condition. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to B. As a result, the current flows on inner surface from site A to B. So we discussed always current flow from positive to negative only, right? Positive charge to negative charge. So A to B, this is site A, this is site B. So from inner positive and here inner negative, right? The current flows from here to here. Then what happens? Here negative charge developed, here positive charge developed. So this is after transmission. What happens? This became this side becomes resting membrane, like a polarizer side, and this side becomes depolarizer side. That only given here. The outer surface current flows from site B to A to complete the circuit. So inner region A to B, outer region B to A, because B consists with outer positive and A consists with negative, right? And hence the polarity is reversed and the action potential is generated at site B. So whenever the action potential is generated at site B by the charges are transferred from one side to another side, the action potential at site A arrives at the site B, A to B, and B to again next site, and B next site to next site. Suppose for example B to C and C to D, like that. You understood? So throughout the length of the axon, the action potential generates not at the same time, right? So as like this, polarization, depolarization, again polarized, depolarized, polarized, depolarized, as like that the charges are moves, the action potential moves throughout the length of the axon. The sequence is repeated along the axon and the impulse is conducted. So the sequence is repeated, this scenario is repeated along the length of the axon and the impulse is conducted. The rise in permeability to sodium is extremely short lived and it quickly followed by the rise in permeability to K+. So rise in permeability sodium, when rise in permeability sodium in the action potential, sodium influx is extremely short lived and it is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to potassium, right? Again after this, after passing of action potential, again the depolarized site becomes as a polarized, right? For that what required? The more potassium influx is required. Immediately K plus diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting membrane. So immediately the potassium diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting membrane. Again resting membrane potential will be happens. Thus the fiber becomes ready for further stimulation, right? So whenever it is passes and next stimulations, it is ready for next stimulation. Again, after the passes of action potential, again the resting membrane potential will be formed. Clear? And you should remember important point: polarization, depolarization, hyperpolarization, and repolarization. Polarization means what? Inner negative, outer positive. That is first. In resting state. Depolarization. Depolarization means what? Depolarization means inner positive, outer negative. That is in action potential, right? And the next one, hyperpolarization. After passing of action potential, inside again negative charge will develop, right? So that negative charge, compare with polarization, more negative charge is developed inside. That is called as hyperpolarization. You got it or not? Once the action potential passes, the inside more negative charge is developed compare with the earlier, right? So in polarization minus 70 MV, in hyperpolarization minus 90 MV millivolts, right? So more negative charge is developed, that is called as hyperpolarization. And next one, repolarization. Repolarized means what? So again polarization develops. Clear? Right. That 4 words you should remember. And next one, synaptic transmission of impulses. So in this topic we discuss regarding about how the action potential generates and conducted, and how it is transmits through the synaptic bulbs to the another neurons or another body parts. Synapse is a functional junction between the neurons. So between one neuron and another neuron, the junction is called synapse, and it is two types, electrical and chemical synapses. So in our body there is two different types of the synapses are presented, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. In this, the membrane of pre and post synaptic neurons are in close proximity. So impulse transmission is similar to the transmission along an axon. Impulse transmission is faster than chemical synapse, and electrical synapses are very rare in human system. So what are common synapses in our body? That is chemical synapses only. Electrical synapses are very rare. So how electrical synapses works? In this, the membrane of pre and post synaptic neurons are in close proximity. So both are close proximity, nearly presented, which is conducting nerve impulse, which one is receives nerve impulse. Both neurons are close proximity. So impulse transmission is similar to the transmission along an axon. So how the action potential is transmitted? As like that, similarly the electrical synapses works. Impulse transmission is faster in chemical than in chemical synapse. Compare with chemical synapse, electrical synapses are faster, right? Directly action potential receives from one neuron to another neuron, but it is rare. So what are the common synapses? Chemical synapses are common. In this, there is a fluid filled space, synaptic cleft between presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neuron, right? So this is presynaptic neuron and this one is postsynaptic neuron. What is pre? Which one is generates the and conducts the nerve impulses? That is presynaptic, and which one receives? That is called as postsynaptic neuron. And there is a gap is presented between pre and postsynaptic neurons, that is called synaptic cleft, right? And the presynaptic regions have swellings called synaptic knobs or buttons. This is called synaptic knobs or buttons, and they contain synaptic vesicles. Here synaptic vesicles are presented. These synaptic vesicles consist with neurotransmitters or acetylcholine. So there is different types of the neurotransmitters. Chemicals are presented. Those are acetylcholine or adrenaline. So these are all neurotransmitters. So how it works? So whenever the action potential is received by this synaptic bulb, and the neurotransmitters are released, and those neurotransmitters are released into synaptic cleft, and that is received by receptors of postsynaptic neuron, right? That conducts another action potential in the other neuron. Here given impulse transmission through chemical synapse. Impulse reaches at axon terminal. Synaptic vesicles bind on plasma membrane. Release of neurotransmitter.